The sun rose gently over the village of Amorca, casting long shadows over red earth paths and thatched roofs still heavy with the dew of dawn. Life stirred slowly, roosters crowed, market women swept the fronts of their stalls, and the rhythmic pounding of fufu began to echo through the stillness. And in the grand compound at the edge of the village, Amina stood at the veranda of her husband's house, wrapped in a gold and indigo wrapper, her gaze fixed on the horizon as though she could stare beyond the hills and escape her thoughts. She stood still, composed like a queen, the perfect image of a dutiful wife, the envy of many women and the admiration of elders. To outsiders, she was the jewel of Amorca, the wife of Chief Obinna, a man whose name sent silence across any room. Chief Obinna was no ordinary man. He was a towering figure in both wealth and influence, with cattle herds stretching beyond the eye's reach and warehouses in the neighboring towns. He had been awarded chieftaincy not just for his riches but for his iron grip on village politics and tradition. His words could sway decisions in the council of elders, and his approval could determine whose land would be blessed or whose child might find a school scholarship. People said Obinna was blessed by the gods themselves, and they said that the gods had smiled upon Amina too, for being chosen by him. Women whispered her name at riverbanks, saying she was lucky, that she ate well, dressed like royalty, and lived in a house large enough to house 3 families. But the house, though grand in structure, was built on a foundation of silence and pain. Amina had not chosen this life. She had been 15 when her father came back from the palm oil trade in the next village and declared that Obinna had asked for her hand. Her mother wept quietly that night, knowing what such a marriage meant, but said nothing. It was a great honor, after all. Obinna had provided 10 cows, crates of schnapps, and enough money to build a new home for Amina's family. The elders danced, her father beamed with pride, and the drums beat deep into the night. Amina, dressed in red beads and frightened eyes, was handed over like a prized yam. Her voice was the first thing she learned to lose. In Chief Obinna's home, obedience was the law, and questioning was a crime. She learned quickly when to speak, when to kneel, how to lower her eyes just so, and when to disappear into silence. Obinna was not outwardly violent at first. He was calculating, controlling, a man who smiled in public but wielded power like a blade behind closed doors. He monitored every word she said, what she wore, who she spoke to, and even when she could visit her mother. He reminded her constantly that she belonged to him. A woman must know her place, he'd say, each word measured like a judge handing down a verdict. You are a chief's wife. That alone should satisfy you. Over the years, Amina mastered the art of performance. She smiled when people greeted her in the market. She praised her husband before the other women. She helped organize village fundraisers and was present at every funeral and naming ceremony. She served elders kola nuts with grace and bore Obinna 3 children, all boys, which only elevated her status. The village women said she had the hands of the gods and the womb of royalty. But they did not see the loneliness curled in her bones, or the fear that darkened her eyes whenever Obinna's voice rose even slightly. Behind closed doors, their home was a fortress of control. Obinna demanded perfection in everything, his meals, his clothes, his sons. If the stew had too much salt, if the boys giggled too loudly, Amina paid the price with sharp words or long silences that hurt more than slaps. He did not beat her often, for that would leave marks. His violence was quieter, withdrawn affection, cutting insults, threats to send her back to her father's house in shame. He reminded her often that everything she had was his. The clothes she wore, the food she cooked, even the children she bore. You came here with nothing, he told her once, after a heated argument. And you will leave with nothing. But Amina did not respond. She merely nodded, bowed her head, and carried the tray of bitter leaf soup back to the kitchen. Inwardly, something in her had begun to tremble, like a bird flapping silently inside a cage. She no longer cried. Her tears had dried up years ago, somewhere between the 2nd childbirth and the 3rd anniversary celebration where Obinna had toasted to her obedience like she was a dog that had learned to fetch. And yet, despite all this, the community saw only the surface. When Amina passed by, they whispered, "Look at her, always so calm, so elegant." The young girls pointed at her beaded hair and practiced walking like her. The elders smiled in approval, proud that Amuka had such a refined representation of womanhood. No one asked how she felt. No one wondered if her silence was peace or pain. In a world where women were taught to swallow their hurt like warm palm wine, Amina was considered a perfect wife. But deep in her chest, a storm was gathering, quiet and slow like the gathering of dark clouds before the monsoon. She had obeyed, performed, endured. She had let tradition silence her, let love shame her, and let marriage reduce her to shadow. But storms do not stay silent forever. And Amina, once the girl who was handed over in silence, would one day rise not with tears, but with thunder. Her story was not over. It was only beginning. In the early years of her marriage, Amina held on to hope like a thread, thin, fraying, yet stubbornly intact. She told herself that perhaps Obina would change. Perhaps he would remember that she, too, had a name and a past before she became the wife of the chief. But Obina had not married a partner, he had claimed a possession, and what he wanted was not love, but control, total, unquestioned, godlike control. It began with words. Sharp, casual, and always delivered with that cold finality that left no room for argument. "You talk too much," he'd say when she tried to share a thought. "Don't sing in front of guests," when she hummed a tune her mother had taught her. "Leave stories for market women," when she told her sons folk tales before bed. At first, she protested gently, unsure of the new lines being drawn. But each time she stepped out of them, the punishment followed: a slammed door, a week of silence, food untouched, whispered insults in the presence of the housemaid. Eventually, she stopped pushing. Then came the isolation. One by one, her ties to the outside world were cut. Her visits to her mother's compound became too frequent. Her friends were bad influences. She stopped attending women's meetings because Obina said it was a place for gossip and lazy wives. When she tried to write letters to her cousin in the city, he burned them without opening them. "Why does a married woman need to write letters?" he asked with a laugh that sent chills down her spine. The laughter of a man who knew exactly how much power he held. Physical abuse came next, not in the obvious, brutal ways that leave bruises for the neighbors to see. No, Obina was far too calculating for that. It was in the yanks of her arm when she turned too slowly. The tight grip at her waist when she danced too freely at a family celebration. The shove against a wall when she questioned him in private. And the slaps, not many, but enough to remind her that her body was not her own. She learned to flinch before his anger ever landed. And he never apologized. To apologize would mean admitting she had value beyond her obedience. In the village, the whispers still said she was blessed. Women saw her gold bangles and full kitchen and thought she had everything. But she had nothing. Not even herself. Amina had once been more than this. In her girlhood, she was the voice of the village square. Her stories captivated children and elders alike. She could sing the moon into sleep and the crops into bloom. Her mother had taught her the healing songs, old rhythms that calmed fevers and nightmares. She knew how to grind herbs and speak with the ancestors through dream. When she was 12, the oldest midwife had declared she would be the next healer of Amoka. But all that ended when she became Obina's wife. He forbade her from entertaining nonsense. Her drums were taken away. Her herbal books burned. The calabash where she kept sacred stones and feathers from her ancestors was hidden from her. "A chief's wife has no business with charms and fables," he'd said. "Do you want people to call you a witch?" In a society where being a wife meant being silent, her spirit was slowly caged. No more songs. No more stories. No more self. When Amina once sought counsel from the elders, old women whose wisdom she thought might shelter her, she was met with sighs and warnings. "Endure, my daughter," one said, placing a hand on her knee. "Marriage is not easy. We all have our burdens." Another added, "You must not bring shame to your family. Obina paid your bride price well. You are his now. Don't dishonor your people." Even her own mother, who had known this pain herself, could only hold her hands and weep. "He is your husband," she whispered. "Bear it like a woman." So Amina bore it. Like women have borne burdens since time itself, quietly, gracefully, invisibly. She never raised her voice, even when Obinna insulted her before the children. She never cried when he took credit for her ideas during village meetings. She simply nodded, served him his food, and slipped back into the corners of the compound like smoke. Her sons grew up watching their mother diminish herself daily, and though they loved her, even they began to mimic their father's commands. "Mama, don't argue," her eldest once said, echoing Obinna's tone. It broke something in her, silently. The cultural expectations weighed on her like stones pressed into her chest. A woman's worth was in her ability to endure. A wife was a symbol of patience, her success measured not by her happiness, but by how long she could stay married, no matter the cost. The dowry Obinna had paid was not just a transaction, it was a silencing. Amina's body, her dreams, her voice had all been purchased, and so long as she remained in that house, society would consider her honored. But the truth, hidden beneath fine wrappers and painted smiles, was that Amina was dying slowly. Each day, a little more of her faded. Her voice echoed only in her dreams now, where she still told stories to the trees and sang beneath the stars. In the waking world, she was a ghost in gold jewelry. Yet something remained, faint but alive. A flicker. A memory. A name. A song unsung. Amina. Not wife. Not possession. Not Obinna's shadow. Just Amina. And someday, she would remember that fully. Someday, she would gather the broken pieces of herself and become whole again. But for now, she suffered quietly, as the world around her applauded her silence, mistaking it for grace. It was during the season of harmattan, when the winds blew dry and restless through the village, stirring red dust into the air and making the skin crack like old wood, that everything began to shift. The sky hung low with a pale, ash-colored hue, and the leaves on the trees rattled like bones. It was a time the elders said revealed hidden things, when the spirits whispered clearer, and truths refused to stay buried. In those days, something deep within Amina also began to stir, not yet fully awake, but restless, like an old drum being warmed for a call to battle. The signs came subtly at first. Obinna had grown more secretive, more boastful in private conversations. He often returned home late from council meetings, smelling of palm wine and perfume that wasn't hers. He spoke of expanding his name, cementing his legacy. "A man like me must have a strong house," he said one evening, his eyes avoiding hers. "Not just walls, foundations. More sons. More women." Amina's chest tightened, but she said nothing. She had heard such things before. This time, though, something about his tone made her uneasy. Then came the day when she overheard the servants whispering, Obinna had begun courtship with a younger woman from a neighboring village. Not just any woman, but the daughter of a man who had once contested Obinna's position in the council. It was a political move, a union meant to silence rivals and multiply power. The woman was barely 16. Amina's stomach turned. She was not consulted, not even informed. The girl's family had already begun preparations. The goats had been promised, palm oil shipped in bulk, wrappers delivered in colorful stacks. And still, Obinna said nothing to her. When she finally asked him, gently, with all the caution she had learned over the years, he looked at her with cold amusement. "Do I need your permission to take a wife?" he asked, his voice low and final. "I am a chief. You are just the first among many. Be grateful I've let you stay this long." And with that, he dismissed her, like one might shoo a stray chicken from the compound. But the deepest wound came not from the betrayal of marriage, or even the indignity of being bypassed. It came from what he did next. At the back of their compound, tucked behind the yam barn, was a small grove of palm trees where Amina had built a shrine in honor of her late mother. It was a quiet place, hidden from most eyes, where she went to pray, to pour libations, to speak to the ancestors when the world around her became too loud to bear. There, nestled in a clay pot, were the last remnants of her old self, feathers from the sacred owl, bones carved with protective signs, beads her mother had woven with stories, and a cloth soaked with healing oil. She visited often, especially when she felt her voice slipping away entirely. Obinna had always scorned the shrine. He called it superstition, village foolishness. "You're a chief's wife," he'd sneer. "Not a forest priestess." But he had tolerated it, so long as it remained unseen. Until the day he didn't. Amina returned from the stream that afternoon with her sons, only to find smoke rising from the grove. A group of young men were laughing loudly as they scattered the clay pots and stamped out the fire that once burned in a sacred bowl. Her shrine, her last tie to her mother, her past, her identity, was in ashes. Her beads broken. Her feathers trampled. Her cloth burned to dust. Obinna stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. When she ran to him in horror, her hands trembling, tears already welling, he met her with disdain. "I warned you," he said. "You live in my house. There will be no witchcraft in my name. This land is mine. That bush belongs to me. Those pots? Yours? Never. They are nothing. Just like you." She could barely speak. Her lips parted, but the words would not come. Her children stood behind her, silent, confused, watching their mother collapse inward. She knelt beside the broken remnants, her fingers clawing at the dirt, trying to gather what little remained, a charred bead, a cracked feather, a few burnt bones. But it was useless. The spirit had been driven out. The place had been defiled. And then, as if all of this wasn't enough, Obinna uttered the final blow. "You will not stop me from growing this house," he said, voice loud enough for all nearby to hear. "If you cannot accept your place, you will leave. And you will take nothing. Nothing. Not your wrappers, not your cooking pots, not your shrine, nothing. You are dust without me. You were nothing before I picked you, and without me, you are a shameful girl with broken dreams and no name." The words settled like poison in her bones. She stood there, in the fading light, surrounded by ash and humiliation, and for the first time in years, she did not cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It hollowed her out completely. But in that hollow space, something else entered, not rage, not grief, but clarity. She was not just unloved. She was disrespected in every way a woman could be, as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, and now, as a spirit. Her voice had been stolen. Her body controlled. Her traditions mocked. Her sacred memories desecrated. But something inside her did not die with that shrine. Something refused to be burned. As night fell and the winds picked up again, Amina rose slowly from the ground. Her hands were black with ash. Her face still. She looked once at Obinna, and then walked into the house in silence. No wailing. No curses. Just silence, heavy, strong, dangerous. Because sometimes, silence is not surrender. Sometimes, it is the sound a woman makes before she remembers her power. The night after Obinna desecrated Amina's shrine, a storm rose from the east. Not the kind that thundered with lightning or flooded the yam barns. This was a different kind of storm, slow and thick, the air humming with tension, like the village itself held its breath. Dogs refused to bark. Even the wind, which had howled all week, suddenly fell silent, as though paying attention to what was about to unfold. Inside Obinna's grand house, Amina moved like a ghost. No anger, no screams, just that terrifying calm that often comes before a great unraveling. The children had gone to bed. The servants had retreated early, sensing something unnatural in the air. Obinna sat in the outer room drinking palm wine with two of his favored kinsmen, laughing louder than usual, his voice forced and brash, as if trying to drown out a fear he didn't want to name. But fear had already entered his home, not from outside, but from within. In the earliest days of their marriage, long before the beatings, before the threats, before Obinna's name cast a shadow over hers, he had confided something to Amina during one drunken night, a mistake he would never admit aloud, but one that had planted the seed of fear between them. "You don't know what it took for me to become chief," he had slurred, sprawled across their marriage bed. They think I inherited power, but my lineage was cursed. My grandfather broke a pact. He was not meant to take the chieftaincy, but he did, and the gods turned from us. That's why my father never rose. That's why the firstborn sons in our family, they suffer, always." He laughed bitterly, a man drunk on guilt. "But I fixed it. I buried the truth. No one remembers. And no one ever will." Amina remembered every word. What Obina never knew was that she had already known the story. Her mother, a powerful griot and healer before her death, had once shared tales of broken pacts and ancestral dishonor, stories whispered late into the night. She had told Amina of a sacred calabash kept hidden in the oldest part of the family shrine, sealed with red earth, tied with black goat hair, and marked with the symbol of the wind god. Inside it, bound in layers of protection, were names of those who broke the oath, and the blood price still unpaid. The calabash held songs that could call the spirits to witness. It contained ancestral tokens and, most dangerously, the original palm-scripted confession of Obina's grandfather. That calabash had not burned with her shrine. Amina had hidden it long ago. Even then, even in her pain, something within her knew the day would come when her silence would end, not with her voice, but with truth. That night, after Obina's cruel declaration, Amina went to the back of the compound under the cover of darkness. The dust from her destroyed shrine still lay heavy on the air, but she walked past it without pause. She made her way to the base of the oldest Irako tree, half swallowed by wild vines, where she had once dug a shallow pit. Her hands, steady as ever, brushed away the leaves and soft earth until her fingers touched the smooth, warm curve of clay. The calabash. Small, unassuming, sealed tightly with red twine, but pulsing with spiritual heat. She held it to her chest and breathed deeply. The air shifted around her. The ancestors, restless for decades, turned their gaze toward her. They were watching. Inside the house, she placed it in the center of her room and knelt before it. She did not open it. That was not necessary, not yet. The calabash's power was not only in what it contained, but in who held it. To possess it was to hold the truth of Obina's bloodline, a truth that, if spoken aloud before the council of elders, would destroy him completely. He had spent his entire life suppressing her not only because she was a woman, but because she had something he never could, memory. Knowledge. Lineage. Amina was not just a wife. She was a living archive. A vessel of stories, a blood daughter of healers and spirit speakers. Her womb might have borne his children, but her voice carried his undoing. Obina had always feared this, even if he never said it outright. He feared her wisdom, her calm, the way she moved through pain with purpose. He feared that her silence was not submission, but storage. And he was right. When he found the calabash in her hands the next morning, his expression cracked for the first time in years. He had come to her room, swaggering, expecting submission. Instead, he found her seated like a priestess at an altar, the calabash resting before her like a verdict. His feet froze. His tongue stumbled. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice sharp, too sharp. She looked up at him with eyes like mirrors. Calm. Cold. Endless. "I've always had it," she replied. "You just never saw me clearly enough to notice." His face drained of color. For a man who controlled entire lands, who dictated the price of palm oil and who sat at the highest seat during village gatherings, this small clay vessel, cradled in the lap of the wife he had tried to silence, shook him like nothing else ever had. You don't know what's in there," he hissed. "I do," she said simply. "I know everything." He moved forward, hand raised as if to strike or snatch the calabash, but she didn't flinch. She didn't have to. "Touch me now, and by dusk, the council will know you wear a stolen title," she said softly. "Let them hear the confession. Let them read your grandfather's lies. Let the priests inspect your family's offerings and see the hollow roots of your claim." Obina's hand dropped. His mouth moved, searching for words. "You would bring shame to your own house?" "You already did," she said. He stood there, shaking slightly, not from fear of her, but from what she could release, what she represented. In his world, women were ornaments, not threats. But Amina had become the thing he feared most, a woman with power he couldn't buy, beat, or bury. He had destroyed her shrine, her stories, her voice. But he forgot one thing: you cannot silence a woman who remembers. And Amina remembered everything. The night Amina fled, the moon was swallowed by clouds, and the stars hid like shy children behind curtains of mist. She did not wait for dawn. With the calabash wrapped in a faded shawl and tied tightly against her chest, she stepped out of Obina's compound for the last time, barefoot and unafraid. She left behind everything, her wrappers, her name in the community, even her children, for now. She knew the spirits would guide her, and when the time came, she would return for them, not as a shadow of herself, but as a woman fully risen. Her feet sank into the earth with every step, the soft soil holding her like an old friend. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying voices only she could understand, old voices, women's voices, voices of the forgotten and the sacred. She did not look back, not even once. Behind her was the house where her spirit had been bound. Ahead was the unknown, yes, but it was also freedom. She trusted her feet, her breath, her blood. Most of all, she trusted the calabash. It pulsed faintly against her ribs, as if beating with a heart of its own. The path she chose was not the one used by traders or farmers. No. She turned toward the forbidden forest, Agbalanta, a place of spirits and old gods. Children were warned never to go there. Elders only entered it during secret rites. But Amina had no fear. She was not entering as an outsider. She was returning. The forest recognized her. The trees leaned in. The night insects hummed welcome songs. The ancestors had seen her coming. As she stepped past the first line of twisted Irako trees, the air changed. It thickened, heavy with incense and ancient breath. Her vision blurred slightly. Not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, the crossing. She had stepped beyond the realm of ordinary life. She had entered the space where the living and the dead speak without barriers. Amina pressed forward, the calabash warm against her. With every step, it seemed to hum, a vibration that traveled through her spine. The forest floor was soft and damp, but she did not slip. Her feet found purchase where none should be. Owls called in patterns that mimicked human speech. She followed them. Once, a giant millipede crawled across her path, paused, and turned back the way it came. She took it as a sign and changed direction. The forest tested her, yes, but it also protected her. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time worked differently in Agbalanta. Hunger came and left without complaint. Thirst did not burn. Amina began to hear things more clearly, voices rising from within the calabash. They were not loud. They were not frightening. They were stories, stories buried for generations. She heard her mother's voice first, soft and rhythmic, telling her of a line of women who once held the secrets of kings in their palms. Women who whispered truth into the ears of warriors, who danced before battles and sang over newborn chiefs. Women who were erased because they remembered too much. Then came visions. Not dreams, not hallucinations, memories not her own, passed through blood and spirit. She saw a tall woman with skin like river stone, kneeling before a burning tree, placing a calabash just like hers beneath its roots. She saw a gathering of men in red caps, forging a false pact, burning the name of the true heir. She saw Obina's grandfather swearing loyalty to the gods and then spitting on the offering bowl as soon as no one watched. The calabash showed her the full truth, not just of Obina, but of the system that protected him. Elders who knew but remained silent. Women who were married off before they could speak. Daughters who were buried beneath titles and land disputes. Amina wept, not from grief, but from recognition. She was part of a continuum. Not alone. Not broken. Just hidden, like the calabash had been, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Deep in the forest, she came to a river that shimmered not with moonlight, but with something else, a silver glow that seemed to rise from its depths. It was said that this river, Odura, was the final trial for anyone seeking truth. It did not carry water, but memory. To cross it was to let go of who you had been. Amina hesitated only a moment. Then she stepped in. The water was warm, not cold, and it pulled at her gently, like a midwife coaxing new life. As she waded through, images rose from the surface: her wedding day, her first lost child, the night Obina struck her in front of the council. But then came other images, ones she hadn't seen before. Her future. Her walking through the village marketplace, not in silence, but surrounded by women listening to her speak. Her children, grown and proud. Her story being told by young girls under mango trees. The truth she carried becoming a river that others drank from. When she reached the far side, her old self had washed away. The Amina who had endured, obeyed, and survived had been replaced by the Amina who would now choose, speak, and lead. Waiting for her at the edge of the bank was a figure cloaked in white. Not a man. Not a woman. Spirit. The figure spoke without moving its mouth. You have crossed the space of forgetting. Now remember. Amina knelt, not in fear, but in reverence. The spirit reached toward the calabash, touched it, and the twine fell away. The lid loosened. Light spilled out, not blinding, but golden, soft, warm. It filled the forest clearing. It sang. Inside the calabash, she saw not just tokens and scripts, but herself, multiplied, echoed through time. She was every woman who had kept a truth hidden in silence. Every woman who had been told to leave with nothing, and yet carried everything that mattered. You are the vessel now, the spirit said. Go. Your voice will wake the sleeping. And just like that, the spirit vanished. Amina wrapped the calabash again, tied it tight, and stood tall. The forest behind her had done its work. She no longer belonged to the house of Obina. She belonged to herself. And now, she would return, not to beg, not to plead, but to speak. The calabash of secrets had awakened. And so had she. Amina arrived in the village of Oru, a quiet settlement nestled between the green-breasted hills of the east. It was not marked on any maps and rarely mentioned at council meetings. Time moved differently there, slower, deeper, with the weight of memory. Her mother had once spoken of it, in hushed tones, calling it the last place the old ways breathe freely. It was also where her mother's sister, Neka, had fled decades ago after defying her own husband's cruelty. Amina had never met her, only heard whispers, of a woman who spoke to spirits through mirrors and healed children with only her breath. When she stumbled into the village at dawn, her feet blistered, her wrapper torn, and the calabash bound tightly to her chest, the people did not ask her name. They looked into her eyes and recognized something ancient. One of the elders simply said, "She has come," and they opened their doors. Neka emerged from her hut later that morning. She was tall, gray-haired, skin like woven leather, and eyes as sharp as broken glass. She stood silently before Amina, who fell to her knees, overcome not just by exhaustion but by recognition. Here stood a mirror of who she might become. Neka reached out, lifted Amina's chin, and smiled faintly. "So, you carry the gourd," she said. "It waited long for your hands." And so began Amina's exile, not a punishment, but a rebirth. The first weeks were quiet. Amina slept for days at a time, waking only to eat a little and drink the bitter healing teas Neka brewed from forest roots. The forest outside Oru was different from Agbalanta, less mysterious, more maternal. It wrapped itself around her, lulled her, reminded her that safety was not a myth. The women of the village, curious but respectful, came to sit nearby while she rested, humming songs of old. Sometimes she wept. Other times she laughed in short bursts, surprised at the sound of it. Then one day, she asked for charcoal and palm leaves. She sat under a kola tree and began to draw. Symbols, stories, songs long buried in her spirit began to pour out. She sang softly as she worked, and the women gathered closer. They recognized fragments of the old ways, the tongue of the moon priestesses, the rhythm of the fertility songs, the tales of sky daughters and fire wives. She was remembering, but more than that, she was reviving. The calabash, kept nearby at all times, pulsed with quiet energy, as if each song drawn from her mouth awakened something in the earth around her. Soon, women came from neighboring villages. First in twos and threes. Then in caravans. Some were broken like she had once been, bruised, bowed, silenced. Others came seeking, hungry for knowledge, stories, and meaning. Amina welcomed them all. She never spoke of her past, never named Obina or the shame he tried to wrap around her. Instead, she taught through parable, dance, ritual, and song. She led healing circles where women sat under the moon and spoke the names of their mothers, grandmothers, and the pain they carried. They wept. They laughed. They beat drums with their palms and feet. They danced until their backs unbent. Amina would sing as they danced, her voice soft at first, then rising, strong, laced with ancestral power. One night, under a crescent moon, she opened the calabash before them. Not fully, just enough. A white mist rose from its mouth, curling like smoke but carrying voices, not of fear, but of memory. The women saw visions of their foremothers, dreams of children yet unborn, images of themselves free and powerful. They gasped, some fell to their knees. Others simply held hands in silence. No one asked how Amina did it. They knew. She had become the mouthpiece of the ancestors. Word spread far beyond Oru. Even the elders in Obina's region heard rumors of a woman called Mother of Songs, who walked with spirits and healed the barren with only a whisper. Some dismissed it as superstition. Others, especially the wives and daughters of powerful men, began to sneak away at night, walking for hours to sit at Amina's feet. She never turned anyone away. She taught women to grow healing herbs and mix oils that soothed the bruises hidden beneath wrappers. She taught them the old names for the moon's cycles, the prayers for birth and burial, the meanings of dreams. She revived rites long considered dead, the naming of girls with warrior titles, the forging of sisterhood bonds sealed by blood and story. For Amina, this was not revenge. It was restoration. In the stillness of Oru, she rediscovered her voice, not just as a singer or healer, but as a living archive. She no longer feared her own power. She no longer asked for permission to exist. The calabash did not make her powerful, it had only reminded her of what she already carried. Every night, before sleep, she sat before it and listened. Sometimes, it remained silent. Other times, it whispered guidance, dreams of which women to call, which rituals to perform, which stories to retell. The voices were never commanding. They were companions. Amina did not serve the calabash. She walked with it. Neka watched from a distance, proud but quiet. One evening, as they sat under the stars, the elder finally spoke. "You have become what they feared," she said. Amina smiled. "No. I have become what we forgot." They sat in silence after that, the stars dancing above them like the fireflies in the forest. In the distance, a drumbeat began, soft, steady, certain. Amina's students were beginning the night's healing circle. She stood, her wrapper swaying with the wind, her eyes filled with quiet certainty. Tomorrow, more women would come. And she would be ready, with stories, with songs, with truth. She was no longer just a woman in exile. She was Amina, the awakened. And her voice was now louder than Obina's silence had ever been. At first, Obina dismissed the rumors as idle women's chatter. What threat could a runaway wife pose? She had left with nothing. No land, no children, no name. She was dust, just as he had declared. And yet, whispers kept coming, drifting in with traders, slipped into stories told by fireside griots. They spoke of a woman in the eastern hills who healed barren wombs, sang the spirits awake, and called forth the truth from ancient calabashes. They called her Mother of Songs. Some even said she spoke with the voices of the ancestors themselves. Obina laughed it off, but the laughter grew tighter each time. Then the drought came. The rains, once faithful as clockwork, failed. His yam fields shriveled. The river near his compound dropped to a slow, muddy trickle. Fishermen returned with empty nets. Elders gathered and cast cowries, their brows furrowed. They saw signs of imbalance, of something sacred disturbed. Still, Obinna refused to acknowledge any link to Amina. When his second wife, the one he married hastily after driving Amina out, packed her belongings and left in the dead of night, he did not cry out. But the servants heard him hurl a stool against the wall, and a sacred mask shattered. She had said only one thing before leaving: "You cannot build a home on a woman's broken bones." By the time his own council members began to mutter during meetings, Obinna was no longer sleeping. His dreams were thick with smoke and shadows. In them, he saw Amina, always Amina, standing in the forest with the calabash in her hands. She never spoke. She only looked at him. And that silence rattled him more than any curse. People stopped greeting him with the same warmth. Mothers crossed their arms when he passed. Children stopped singing his praises at ceremonies. At the market, he heard women humming songs that sounded oddly familiar, melodies Amina once sang while preparing herbs, now woven with new verses, songs of return, of truth, of flame. Then the message came. It was not a letter, not a threat. It came as a story, performed by a griot at the marketplace. The griot, dressed in ochre robes, sang of a powerful chief who banished his wife after dishonoring her soul. The wife, keeper of the calabash of secrets, journeyed to the sacred forest, where the spirits clothed her in memory and fire. She healed the land with her hands. Women walked from miles around to taste her words. She opened the mouth of silence, and out came the rot. The chief's house began to crumble. His throne lost its weight. And the woman? She was named by the stars. Obinna listened from the shadows. He knew it was not just a tale. The griot never said his name, but everyone in that market turned to look at him when the final verse fell like a stone. To silence a storm is to teach it thunder. For the first time in his life, Obinna felt truly afraid, not of losing power, but of being seen for who he really was. A fraud. A man built on fear. A man who struck the sun and believed it would never rise again. The council summoned him not long after. They did not accuse. They only asked, "What truth does she carry that we do not?" He had no answer. Even the land refused to lie for him now. That night, alone in his compound, he opened the family shrine, the one he once barred Amina from entering. He stood before the offerings and called out, but no spirit came. The air was still. Cold. Even the gods had turned their backs. He fell to his knees and wept, not just for what he had lost, but for the truth he could never reclaim. Amina had taken the one thing he feared, the story of who he truly was. She had carried it into exile, and now the whole world sang it back to him. By silencing her, he had made her a legend. And legends do not return to kneel. They rise. They lead. They endure. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Amina entered the village she once fled. The morning mist clung to the earth, uncertain of her return, yet even the wind seemed to still itself, as if honoring her steps. She came not in fanfare or anger, but in certainty. Her wrapper was simple but elegant, her hair wrapped high in indigo cloth. Around her neck hung a string of cowries, humming with the weight of ancestral blessings. In her arms, cradled like a newborn, rested the calabash, wrapped in white cloth and tied with a red thread. The village buzzed before she reached the square. Word had spread in whispers like a wind passed ear to ear, "Amina is coming back." Some thought it impossible. Others, inevitable. They said she had returned for a burial. Her uncle, the last elder who had defended her when the community cast her in silence, had passed. But many knew it was more than mourning that brought her back. It was reckoning. It was restoration. As she walked through the narrow paths between huts and palm trees, women stepped out from their doorways. Some bowed their heads, others raised their fists in quiet salute. The young girls watched her with wide eyes, clutching their mother's hands. They had heard the stories, about the woman who spoke to spirits, who sang children into being, who once defied a chief and came back crowned in wisdom. She walked with grace, but her presence was a storm wrapped in silk. In the village square, the elders waited beneath the talking tree, their red caps still perched firmly but their eyes heavy with shame. They had been there when Obina cast her out. They had nodded when he barked his decree, "She leaves with nothing." Now, they shifted uncomfortably as she approached, flanked by women from Oru and girls from the village itself. She did not kneel before them. She greeted them with respect, but not submission. Her voice was clear, the kind that echoed without raising in volume. "I come not as the girl you once silenced," she said, "but as the woman you made by that silence." A hush settled. Even the birds stopped. She set the calabash at the base of the tree and uncovered it. A faint glow pulsed from its rim, not of magic, but of presence. Memory. Truth. She spoke of healing, of lineage, of the sacred duties forgotten by the village in favor of power and pride. She did not speak Obina's name once, and yet every word carried the weight of his undoing. "You taught us to suffer in silence," she said. "But silence is not peace. And obedience without joy is not honor." The women behind her nodded, their eyes brimming. Some elders lowered their heads. Others stared, caught between reverence and guilt. Then a movement, faint, behind the shrine. Obina. He had not sat with the elders. He did not come to challenge her. He lingered in the shadows, hunched and sunken, hoping not to be seen. He looked smaller now. Time, fear, and truth had gnawed at him. His second wife gone, his allies vanished, the title of chief now hollow. He had ruled through fear, and now fear ruled him. Amina saw him, but did not give him her gaze. She spoke instead to the girls. To the daughters, "Listen, your voices are not curses. They are inheritance." Then to the mothers, "To those who have endured, you are not weak. You are roots. And the tree is rising again." She invited them to touch the calabash, not with their hands, but with their truths. One by one, women stepped forward to share their names, their mothers' names, their stories long buried beneath duty and shame. A song rose, low and haunting at first, then stronger as others joined in. It was not a song of vengeance. It was a song of becoming. When the ritual ended, Amina turned and walked away. Not into exile, but into place. Her place. She did not need a title, nor a compound of her own. She had the people. Their hearts had remembered her. And that was power beyond any chieftaincy. Behind her, Obina remained in shadow. The village, however, had stepped into light. And Amina, once cast out with nothing, had returned with everything that mattered. In the years that followed, Amina's name became more than a memory, it became a song. It was sung during birth rituals, whispered during moon prayers, chanted in ceremonies when girls came of age. Her life, once buried under silence and shame, was now woven into the very fabric of the community she had once been cast from. In every woven cloth and carved wooden stool, her story found a new home. She never reclaimed Obina's compound. She didn't need it. She built her own space on the village's edge, near the riverbank where she once gathered water as a young bride. It became a sanctuary, not just for women, but for truth. The calabash she carried, once feared and hidden, now sat in the center of that home, not as a relic, but as a reminder. It was never just a vessel. Inside it were no weapons, no curses, no fire to burn down kingdoms. What it carried was older and more dangerous, memory. Amina taught that truth had a rhythm. That every voice carried an echo from the past, and that to silence a woman was to silence generations. She taught the girls not only to sing and dance and plant, but to remember, to name their foremothers, to ask questions the elders once told them not to ask, to keep the stories alive. Each week, they gathered in a circle, and one girl would retell a piece of Amina's story, not exactly as it happened, but as it breathed. She taught them that power did not live in thrones or titles. It lived in the woman who dared to speak, to remember, to return. The calabash became a symbol, not just of her journey, but of every woman who had been told she was nothing. And though it never left Amina's hut, it appeared in drawings, carvings, beadwork, and even lullabies. Young girls carved miniature calabashes from soft wood, painted with red earth and adorned with cowries. They gifted them to each other like sacred heirlooms. The boys, too, came to learn from her. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. Amina welcomed them. She believed healing would mean nothing if it excluded sons. She taught them not to rule, but to serve. To listen. To unlearn what power had taught them about silence and strength. Years passed. Obina died a quiet death, alone and unwept for. His compound crumbled slowly. The village did not mourn him. They did not spit on his name either. They simply stopped speaking it. His story had become a caution, not a legacy. But Amina lived on, not just in flesh, but in form. When her time came, she did not fear death. She called her circle together one last time, held the calabash in her lap, and said only this: "Let the truth be louder than my voice." She passed away surrounded by women singing the first song she ever taught them. And even after her body returned to the soil, the calabash remained. Many years later, on a harmattan morning thick with dust and silence, a small group of children sat beneath the talking tree, the same tree where Amina once stood before the elders. They were gathered around an old woman with skin the color of roasted groundnuts and eyes that still held fire. She held a carved calabash in her lap, its surface smoothed by generations of hands. The children leaned in. "Tell us the story again," one whispered. The old woman smiled, slow and wide. "There was a woman named Amina," she began, her voice a soft tremble. "She was told to leave with nothing, stripped of name, land, dignity. But she carried the one thing even a chief cannot steal." She paused, holding the calabash up as the children stared. "Truth." The word landed like a drumbeat. They nodded, wide-eyed. Some didn't fully understand, not yet. But they would. The story would live in them now, like it had lived in her, like it had once burned in Amina's bones. And so the circle continued. The calabash would never be empty, not as long as one voice remained to tell, to remember, to sing. Not as long as truth, once carried in silence, kept finding new tongues to speak it.